Welcome to Grandma Has ADHD, the podcast exploring the surprising, challenging, and often overlooked world of ADHD in seniors. I'm your host, Jami Shapiro, the founder of Silver Linings Transitions and an ADHD specialist. Professionally, as a senior move manager for more than 10 years, I've worked intimately with seniors challenged with decluttering and downsizing. Personally, I am the child of two ADHD parents, and I have ADHD. ADHD isn't something that goes away with age. Grandma Has ADHD is here to educate and entertain seniors and those who love them with stories of hope, resilience, and strategies, because it's never too late to understand yourself better and find your tribe. Let's get started with today's episode. Hello and welcome to Grandma Has ADHD. I am your host, Jami Shapiro. I am joined by my producer, Justin, on TikTok, and we have a special guest today, Ian Wahlert from ADHD Life Coaching. Did I say that right, Ian?
You got it. Nice and simple.
Yay! Because you know that executive memory. We just discussed it. But Ian is an ADHD coach who I know personally and have even done a session with. And I was excited that he agreed to be one of our inaugural guests on Grandma Has ADHD. So Ian, tell us a little about yourself. And of course, what is your ADHD story?
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm really excited. And what a great topic. What a great topic, right? Because it's really in the wild, wild west of ADHD. It's an untouched area and hopefully supporting grandmas with ADHD. Yeah.
Not just grandma. Called it grandma because it was, we're going to do grandpas too.
And grandpa.
And it really doesn't even have to be a grandparent, really. It just needs to be a senior. That they say there's really no studies for 50 and over, but I'm going to extend this and let's go for 65 when we're calling them seniors. Okay.
Perfect.
A human being breathing over the age of 65. Back to the Wild West.
Back to the Wild West. Yeah. So wonderful that the ADHD is this wild, wild west of a space in the realm of coaching, medication, therapy, how to support people the best. It's really an under-supported, under-recognized area is the seniors that didn't have that experience when they were younger, even, in any way. So I'm just really wonderful to see that you're bringing light and focus to that and support to that. So back to what your question actually was. Yes, I'm an ADHD coach. It's what I do full time and I love it. I'll get to my journey, but it was something that changed my life. So it's something that I want to bring to the world. I was diagnosed when I was 21, when I had emotional exhaustion from university. And I started that journey and spent the next 10 years on medication. And from then I moved continents, I moved spaces, and I grew with it. And then when I got to the professional field, I really kind of collapsed. I created a whole bunch of opportunities for myself, a lot of room for growth. And every time I would hit these walls of anxiety or these walls of inability to function how I thought I should function. And it was really quite crippling to my self-confidence and myself. And it wasn't until I really hit a low that I had a girlfriend at the time, my wife now, she said, you got to go get your stuff sorted out. And she got me some coaching sessions. And from that point on, it started to arm me with a different language, a different way to speak about ADHD and recognizing it beyond medication. So that's from that point on, after several years of support there, finding out the right medication and self-work, I found myself in a point where before I could barely hold a job or I'd go through this roller coaster emotionally and physically, and to the point where all of a sudden I had a really flourishing corporate career, which was something that I was trying to do at that time. And I also had a baby and I also had a coaching business all happening at the same time. And I was present and it felt good, right? And that reflection kind of blew my mind and it really inspired me to double down into ADHD coaching because there was nothing special about me in the sense of my ability to go from one place to another, but that fact that I could go from non-functioning to functioning to thriving actually was something that's inspired me ever since to help other people find that space, find that pathway, find that journey. And I have, and I do, and I see it every day, and it keeps me going. So I'll morph that into my fixation, my ADHD fixation. That's what I do. I really love what I do. I love working with people with ADHD and engaging in their stories and supporting them. And I keep learning about it and I keep growing, and it feeds my need for constant knowledge and how do I put myself in a space to be my best self, to show up, to support others. So that's what I love to think about and do. And it supports my career and it supports me showing up in my life for my kids, for my clients. And that's where my energy goes right now.
Great.
So you were kind of, especially for a guy, diagnosed a little bit late, because usually things come up during K through 12 that are like, hey, wait a minute. So I'm just curious, what did lower school look like for you? What did elementary, middle, and high school look like? How was that?
Yeah, great question. I'm not a hyperactive type. I'm physically, exercise is really important to my life. It's important for my well-being and my brain and my emotions, but I wasn't physically moving all the time. So it was more inattentive and emotional regulation stuff. But it wasn't external. Everything was internal, everything. So you could sit in class and you could do good enough to get through class. I had some situations where my mom was writing my papers or dictating my papers for me. Spanish class was the only class I cheated in, for the most part, right? So I had some spaces that I struggled, but I could get through. I think they called it test anxiety at the time. You sit down and you talk to him and he can kind of figure it out, but you put him in a test and he can't do it. So it's test anxiety.
Right. Yeah, I have that too.
Right? So it was unmedicated,
sure.
untreated, and my emotional sensitivity was really internal, right? My anxiety, my nerves, my shyness was really internal. I wasn't sporadic or erratic with my aggression or anger or things like that. It was really how I was internally minimizing myself and my emotions. So it was that journey.
Right. And that just goes to show, as I said in the first episode, that you meet one person with ADHD, you meet one person with ADHD, because Justin had the hyperactive type, which is typical for boys. And Ian, you didn't have that kind. So you're more inattentive like I am. So that was a great question. Thank you, Justin.
Yeah. And you can, for me personally, you can very much tell when I was medicated when I was in school. I have a lot of my old report cards. It goes from A's to B's to C's and D's when I wasn't medicated. It's very obvious.
So I love that you made your, I'm not going to call ADHD anything but a blessing, but that you turned something that was an adversity into a way to help other people. I love that we have optimism, those of us, and we have a strong sense of social justice. How can someone else benefit from ADHD coaching? And especially, I would love to hear more about the emotional regulation, if you can.
Yeah, it's a great question. So ADHD coaching is, for lack of a better word, it's holistic support for people with ADHD, right? Because it's something that impacts all parts of our lives, right? So sometimes people come in like, oh, it's really about my job. It's only about my job. And I kind of just wait until we get to give people their space, because it really impacts more than our job or more than our personal life. But you'll see it in your experience at work, the way they're turning stuff in, the way that they're finishing projects, their ability to get started on things, their confidence in their ability to do these things, their self-talk in that space. And then it'll move into their social life where they feel like they should have more friends or should be a better friend and all these kind of things, into their personal relationships. A lot of situations where the partner with ADHD in a relationship feels more like a child, and the other partner feels like the adult, right? Or the parent. And so a lot of dynamics happening there. You'll see that come up a lot. So a lot of people through coaching, finding their feet, finding their way to be present and functioning at work, be present and functioning and feel their value in relationships. As parents, how do we keep track of all these things that put pressure on our executive functions, right? So maybe you'll start a relationship and it's all good, and then all of a sudden you mix in adult choices or adult planning or expectations or children or whatever it is. Then you'll start to see this gap or this disconnect between the two people in the relationship. The same as work.
So Ian,
in a project. Yes. Yep.
Yeah, I want to interrupt you though, because a lot of the seniors who are going to be listening maybe aren't working. And so how is it going to play out? How do you envision coaching playing out for seniors? One of the things that I have learned is that ADHD becomes harder for seniors because they don't have the structure in place that work might have created. And it's something I also learned is that we parents, we thrive in the chaos of having young children. I know I did, which is why I had 3 kids. So now we're talking to seniors who are discovering they have ADHD. and they maybe aren't working and don't have all of the things, but maybe they have adult relationships with their children. They certainly have friendships, that kind of thing. So how do you see coaching playing out for them and their relationship?
Yeah, great question. I have currently, and I had quite a few clients in this situation. All those things still apply. Absolutely. Structure, how are we doing to maintain ourselves? Do we have any capacity to look at a routine that works for us? The way we're eating or the way we're sleeping or the way we're having fun, right? So once you have this space, people always, if I had all the time in the world, that's what people want. And then all of a sudden that's too much. It's too much executive function, too many decisions, too much stuff. And we just become kind of sedentary sometimes. So in coaching space, we'll work with, where's the individual at in maintaining themselves? Where's their self-image? Who do they want to become as they move into this new part of their life? How do they want to show up and for who? What kind of relationships do they want to have? You get this opportunity to start making really intentional choices about how you want to move forward and what can we put in place to make that happen. So it's really, really interesting. And how do you make friends in this new space? What kind of friends do you want to have? What kind of things do you want to do? Do you want to have them come over and play? I was just having this conversation with a client. Oh, I see these ladies next door and they just want to come in and they want to play like card games and stuff. And I don't want to do that. So I don't want friends. And so we go into the conversation. Well, if you had friends, what would you like to do with them? And she was a doer. So how do we find friends that you make relationships through doing things, through having fun, through keeping movement going in your life instead of sitting around with small talk, which is difficult usually for people with ADHD, right? So how do you still find that environment that works for you and gives your needs being met in this new transition into this new environment or new structure or lack thereof? So we just help them maneuver these situations to create an experience that they'd like to have in this part of their life.
I love that. That's great, Justin. Ian, anything else that you can think would be relevant specifically to the senior population? And I also want to ask you to share something that I learned from you in our talk when you were talking about the hunters and the gatherers. I think that's really fascinating. But so before you answer the hunter-gatherer, just anything else that you think as a coach would benefit seniors? And then how can they find you? I want to make sure that we've covered how can someone who wants to work with Ian, ADHD Life Coaching, find you?
Yeah, great question. So, sorry, there's 3 questions there, I think. So first one, what's the other thing that they can do? I think one is stepping back and finding someone to talk to. It doesn't have to be me, an ADHD coach, but opening up yourself to recognizing that you're wanting to experience life a little bit different, that you are looking to make change or be intentional about how you're going to experience this part of your life, and find someone to talk to about that. Right. So that we don't waste time just wandering or floating, because there is lots of opportunities to find joy and find life and find things that engage you and keep you stimulated that the ADHD brain needs. And we still need to, but we need to be intentional about making those things happen. So have that conversation with someone or start that conversation so you can find things that do give you what you need at this part or any part of your life. So that's where I would suggest people to start, not thinking that things are just going to magically unfold in the way that works out and meets your needs. We got to really take a little bit of control here and be intentional about finding someone to talk to about this.
Great.
That was one of the questions.
The next question was, how do they find you? And then the question was the hunter and the...
Perfect. Yeah. So how to find me? The best way is adhdcoaching.life. And you can just book in and you can have a 45-minute conversation. We can just dive into this stuff or figure out where you are, or figure out this is the right space for you, or who would be the best person for you to talk to, right? To start this conversation. So my door's open for anybody who'd like to have that chat. adhdcoaching.life.
That is easy enough to find. And then I do also want to comment something that you shared that I didn't realize was common for people with ADHD. I cannot stand small talk. So I go to these networking events, and if I'm not having meaningful conversation, I'm checked out. I'm usually the first out the door, and I did not know that was an ADHD thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. The small talk is a big struggle for making emotional connections. I don't really my conversations always go deep really fast. And if that doesn't work for people, that's all right. But the other part to recognize here is the disconnect from time. It's a whole nother conversation around ADHD and time and not feeling it or knowing time. Is that when people start relationships, I went and I met these people once or twice and I don't have a relationship with them, but maybe they think they do with you because for them, small talk is enough for a relationship. right? And they see the progress of time. Okay, then 3 or 4 times, then we'll start talking about more things. But for the ADHD person, it's now or not now. So you get into a relationship and you're like 0 to 1,000. Are we best friends right away, or we're not best friends right away? Then these people are not my friends, and I'm failing at building relationships. Does that make sense?
Wow. It totally does. And it absolutely makes sense why you'd bring a coach into a situation, because we are not properly assessing. I'm not saying properly, but yes. Justin?
I got a follow-up question. And so between that and what you said earlier, and I think where I'm going with this, Jami, if you might not. So in the previous episode, one thing about me, so on TikTok is not my real name, but I have a social media persona with a big following. So that's why I use it, because it's recognized. But I wrote a book called Boundaries because I've been no contact with my mom for 5 years. Jami and I are both limited contact with our father, who is, I would say he's probably more ADHD than you and I combined.
I'd agree with that. You could see it in the films of him in the pram as a baby, just like moving. Right? Go ahead, Justin.
So I wrote a children's book called Boundaries, because my daughter, who's 4.5, I'm going to show you real quick. I wrote a book called Boundaries. This is what it looks like right here.
Beautiful.
That I wrote it was because my daughter, who's 4.5, started asking, hey, why have I never met your mom? I didn't really have a good answer. Looked for a resource, found that a resource didn't exist. So I wrote that, had it looked at by a few therapists before we illustrated and published it, whatever. But in the process of writing that book, I discovered that 26% of millennials and Gen Z are no contact with a parent. And as we both mentioned in the earlier episode, and something that I'm sure we're going to be talking about, is the fact that Jami and I are very challenged, is the word I'm going to use, by some of the things that our father does. He's not a bad person. He's just very much his way. And that's kind of what you were talking about earlier. If they don't want something, they don't want to do it, it's their way. You don't think you're making friends, whatever. He also doesn't have a lot of friends. And he's been married a bunch. And I think that that's relevant for this discussion. He has, though, Jami. I
agree. I didn't say anything. I just was like, I don't want to, anyway, go on.
We argue whether it's 6 or 7 times, but regardless, I feel like perhaps that there's a connection for this older generation who has not been diagnosed, and maybe you've seen this with younger generations, which is why I bring it up, is having this estrangement issue and maybe ADHD being part of it. And I'm very curious about that, because I'm guessing that research has probably not been done. But I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on that, if you have any.
Yeah, it's a great question and a great conversation that I'd really love to have, because it is real, right? So that there's all kinds of stuff, and there's the impulsivity, there's the time that I don't know whose perspective we want to look at this from the person that's experiencing 6 or 7 marriages, or from the family that's supporting the person or around the person that's having 6 or 7 marriages. They're going to have very different experiences, right? So how do the kids or how did the family manage that? How do they experience it and process that and try to interpret the person's feelings or experiences, or the person that's actually going through that? Why are they doing that? What's leading to that? What's the impulsivity or the emotional neediness or the vulnerability issues that are there? And, so there's a whole bunch. It depends on which perspective, I guess, you look at would be determine which way the conversation might go.
And I think it's probably one that we'll need to table, but I agree that there's a lot that we need to figure out about the relationships that are occurring between our parents' generation and us, and also like my children, who don't give people an opportunity the way that we grew up. Like, this is your parent, this is your elder, this is your family, and you tolerate what a lot of our children would never tolerate. But I don't want to take us too far off course, because I do think that this topic deserves its own conversation. And I want to make sure that Ian does get to answer the hunter and the gatherer, unless that's something that you don't want to share. I want to make sure that, Ian, that you share what you think would be relevant to this conversation, but I love it.
I think it's a great topic. I think it's a great entryway for people to discover this ADHD or make a little bit of sense of it. It's actually if you want to read more, there's a couple podcasts of people talking about it in different frames. There's a really good book called A Hunter in a Farmer's World, which I believe we were talking about, Jami. But it's this idea that there are, through time, we look at the different kinds of brains, like people who function differently. The argument is that at different times of history, those brains flourished in different ways, right? So when we were more in the hunter-gatherer kind of space, there was the role to be successful, to survive, to replicate, to all those kind of things, and to be valuable to the tribe. It was really a hunter mindset, right? It wasn't about time and repetition. It was about awareness and connection with your environment and hunting and hyper focusing on the kill and listening to the wind in the bushes and staying moving and constantly being attached to the novelties of life. And you needed that much information going on to feel safe, to feel content, to be valuable. You needed to be connected to all your different senses and all that different information coming in through that lifestyle. And that's what made them successful in the tribe, right? Or in that community.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right.
And then as we progress through time, I was about to use the word evolved, but we progressed through time, we switched to an environment that was more about sedentary farming, right? Where to be successful, it was about repetition, and it was about processes, it was about procedures, about patience, right? To be the most valuable in there, that's the brain that flourished. Farming, getting enough stimulation and feeling content from doing the same thing over and over and over. Only paying attention,
That sounds painful.
Right? Don't eat the cow right away. Keep the cow because you got to milk the cow over time, right? Rotate the crops, rotate the soils, pay attention to these things. Sit and suffer through the long winter so that next season will be better, right? You have this whole different mindset that's there. Where
Right.
The hunters they hit a lot of conflict when they got into that space, right? They wasn't as successful for that kind of brain, that kind of ways of functioning.
Sure.
So they became the jester, they became the jokers, they became the explorers, the travelers, the snake oil sellers, the criminals, right? The people who need to find alternative ways of thriving that worked with this kind of connection, this kind of brain. So when we're now heavily in a farming society, right? So it's really, particularly growing up, particularly going through the system of life as it is right now, it's about repetition and regurgitation of information, right? So it's about how much can you do the same thing over and over successfully? How much can you follow the instructions and do the steps and hold on to the information and then use it again, right? And ignore other things, right? Don't let the other things take up the capacity. You need to be focused on this stuff to be successful in school, which sets your self-confidence, which sets your pathway to value and your way of connection to your society, right? And then it continues into particularly entry levels of jobs and certain jobs the whole time where it's all about your ability to do the specific thing that you're being asked to do in the specific way you're told to do it, right? And replicate that over and over. So it's really hard for ADHD people to find their personality, to find their to find their connection with themselves and their self-value when they're trying to function like a hunter. Like when they're paying attention to the novelty, when they're needing more to feel safe and content, right? They're needing this other kind of, their body is saying, I need more to be valuable, to be safe, to feel content. This is where we need to survive. And the structure is telling you something different. There's a lot of conflict there. So it's a really interesting book as well in concept. It talks about the different kinds of impact it has on people's lives.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Anything that you want to say as we wrap up this episode? I have a feeling we're going to be having you back again, Ian, because you just are a wealth of information. And I'm sure you're going to be looking at coaching through a new lens now that we're starting to explore this Wild West. But anything that you want to say as we wrap up?
Yeah, I would say to people that, if any of this makes sense to you or resonates with you, you're not alone. You're not broken. There are other people experiencing this, and there's things that you can do to help yourself with or without medication. Sometimes the first steps are really hard, particularly in the ADHD space with the diagnosis and finding the right doctor and all that kind of stuff. It can be hard, right? But the information is growing out there. There's people to speak to like Jami or myself or other people that are happy to help give you that first step and finding what the right step is for you. But it's worth it. It changed my life, and I see it change people's lives every day. And it's amazing. And please give yourself that opportunity to know that you're not broken. You're not stuck. We can grow and evolve in a way that works better for you, that works for your way your brain works and things that can bring you joy. So please give yourself that.
I love that. And that ties completely in the tagline that we're using, which is make the rest of your life the best of your life. Because when you do have an understanding, I always say that finding out that I had ADHD was like getting a playbook to my life. Everything just sort of, oh, this now makes so much sense. So I always love connecting with other people who think like I do. And we always have great conversations, Ian. Thank you so much.
I do have clients that are 50, 60, 70 years old, and they find value in finding stuff that works for them. So not just working with me, but that they've showed so much room for growth and so much energy for it. And so please give yourself, like you said, that opportunity.
Wonderful. Justin, any closing words from you?
No, this was very interesting. And I do hope that you come back, because I think that there's a lot here to unpack and talk about. And I think that it makes a difference. It's very interesting for sure. And if you want to, one more time, tell people how to find you, website, all that kind of stuff, please feel free to do that.
Absolutely. Look me up at adhdcoaching.life. Click on the discovery call thing, book in some time. If you're in the San Diego area, happy to meet you in person or go for a walk or something and have a chat.
Great. Thank
That's
you.
awesome.
And you can find us at grandmahasadhd.com. This has been a great episode. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. We will see you next time.
If you are listening to this podcast, there's a good chance you or a loved one is feeling overwhelmed by the challenges of ADHD or disorganization. Since those of us with ADHD tend to struggle with where to begin big projects like moving or home organizing, the Silver Linings Transitions team can guide you through the process, breaking tasks down into manageable steps or handling every detail. There's a reason our team carries magic wands when we work with our clients. We can pack and move your entire home, and you won't have to miss a day of work or touch a single box. We also provide home organizing and storage sort-outs with an understanding of ADHD. If you have a home to sell, we can provide you free or discounted services when we refer you to one of our realtor partners through our realtor referral program. Visit our website at www.silverliningstransitions.com or call us at 760-522-1624 to learn more about how we can help you make your move or home organizational project magical. The opinions expressed on Grandma Has ADHD podcast are those of our guests and hosts and are intended for informational and entertainment purposes only. This podcast does not provide medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The content discussed in this episode is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, mental health professional, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or mental health concern. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or emergency services immediately. The host, guests, and producers of Grandma Has ADHD do not assume any liability for the content of this podcast. Listen at your own discretion.